Hi everyone, and welcome to week 3 of Speak Out Revolution Design Her In campaign. This week we're going to be talking about pregnancy, maternity, and return to work for women working across the engineering sector. We'll be looking at quotes that women have anonymously submitted, and Frances and I will be discussing our experience of those.
Today we're going to talk about returning to work after maternity leave. I think this is going to be one of our longer videos. So I'm going to go through a few of the comments here. Returning after childbirth has been the biggest barrier I've faced, which we understand there's a lot of barriers in the engineering sector. And if this is the biggest one, it's something that we need to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll move on to the next one as well, because I feel like that's it's not an obvious one. It's a shockingly negative one that shouldn't be the case.
It's setting the scene.
It is very much setting the scene. I had to pump regularly in the toilets as there were no facilities. And this is something that I know you yourself can relate to.
Yeah.
And we also know colleagues that were given glass rooms to pump in. So, because meeting rooms nowadays, open plan offices, all of my meeting rooms I know in my office are glass. And I wouldn't know where to go, and I wouldn't want to pump in the toilets personally.
Well, so this is one, I have a lot to say on this topic because I think it's, I've experienced this. I think it's absolutely shocking. There's so much, if you look at the bigger picture, there's so much pressure on women to breastfeed. That's just, I think that's a given. And, it's in some case, and I think it's really damaging to a lot of women's mental health, which is probably another conversation. But there's so much pressure on women to breastfeed, and then you do breastfeed, and then you realize that actually, although government advice is that you breastfeed, the government didn't really set any infrastructure up anywhere for you to be able to do that safely and securely. So if you breastfeed in the street, for example, you're verbally abused. If you, when you go to work, there's some legislation that says employers have to provide a room that locks, but that's nowhere near enough for what you actually need. And what you find is that, one, lots of employers don't even provide that. And then, it's hard to challenge because you've got a whole load of other stuff going off and you don't want to lose your job right when you just have a baby, so you're not really going to complain about it. And what you find from speaking to women, particularly women in the engineering sector, which I've spoken to a lot of them about this, is that women are trying to find solutions to this problem. And what these solutions look like is women pumping in the disabled toilets at work, which I've done so many times, women booking out meeting rooms. So I've expressed breast milk in a meeting room that has a floor to ceiling glass window, because that's how all meeting rooms are made now, with no lock on the door. So I'm having to wheel my chair up to the door so that no one comes in, throw in a muslin over myself, half undressing and trying to do all of that, and then walking through the office with my pumping equipment and having to wash it all out literally in the kitchen sink, the communal kitchen sink in the office, with people waiting behind me to rinse out their tea mugs and things like this. And I can imagine that if I was the sort of person that would get embarrassed, that's a really horrible experience to have to go through every 3 hours, I'll mention, while you're in the workplace. But for me, I was a little bit actually, I'm going to do it. And if anybody asks me, I'm going to say, this is what this organization expects me to do, because it's unable to provide the basic facilities for me to return to work and express breast milk on site. So I was obviously fine about it, and
So I'm really glad that you were empowered to do that. But you're right. I can imagine people that don't always feel comfortable doing that. I suppose I've got a question as well, because there is a massive lack of understanding of breastfeeding and pumping across the board. And I don't know, as I've not had a child.
Yeah.
But the perception is that 5 minutes, you're pumped, you're out, you're ready to go. I don't think that's the case from stories I've heard. It's a much longer process. And then storing the breast milk, I'm guessing you store it in the fridge, which is where everyone else stores their stuff as well. And that's something that isn't discussed and could make you feel uncomfortable?
Yeah, sure. So I would say like start to finish, and that includes like sterilizing your equipment if it needs to be sterilized, and making sure it's clean, the pumping process itself, and then getting the milk to a fridge. And that all assumes that you want to keep the milk, and to be honest, you don't want to be dumping the milk because it's like liquid gold. I would say it varies, but for me, I would say it was like a 30-minute process start to finish. And obviously there's time within that 30 minutes where you're actually having to do it, and then time when you can work or do something else at the same time. So it's about a 30-minute process. It's similar to, for people that don't understand what it's like, I say it's similar to needing to go to the toilet. So it's, you know, the longer you don't go to the toilet, the more physically uncomfortable you become. You need to do it about every 3 hours, every 4 hours. And if you don't do it, then there are accidents that occur. And so I think that's a good way to explain it to someone that doesn't understand what it's about. And so in terms of facilities, like the need for facilities for women to safely express breast milk in the workplace is for me equivalent to providing, toilet facilities. It's that basic. It's that basic and fundamental a need. And yet there aren't any. Like lots of companies don't even recognize that women express breast milk and work at the same time. It's like this thing that people don't realize happens, which is phenomenal in my opinion.
So the next comment is related to breastfeeding. When I told my manager I could not travel due to breastfeeding, he repeatedly called me and shouted at me until I cried. And this attitude is a lack of awareness again, isn't it?
Well, I would say that it's more than a lack of awareness. That's a lack of just basic people management skills, and that person should just be immediately sacked. Like, what is that about? I'm really sorry to hear that was someone's experience. I totally get it though. Like, I think what people don't realize is, like from my experience, if you are breastfeeding and you're working at the same time, everything in your day, and like your day is planned around when you need to express, where your equipment is to do that, finding some sort of room to be able to do it in. Like all of the plans revolve around it, and then you fit the work in between. And so there's really a cost benefit analysis that you do in your head. And I've done it myself. I traveled to a conference when Arthur was about 6 weeks old, and I remember sitting down thinking, like, how massively inconvenient is this going to be, especially considering that I'm breastfeeding, and what do I need to do? And it was almost at the point of like, there's so much I've got to do and so much planning and coordinating that it's probably not even going to be worth it. I did go in the end, and actually the organization were really good. They found me a fridge, which was incredible. Like this woman was literally just pushing a whole fridge to a private room that they found for me. So they were really, really good in the end. But yeah, I get it. I get that someone would say like, I'm not traveling. It's risky as well, because depending on where you are, depending on how old the baby is, if your supply is a whole thing. Like if you compromise your supply, then that it could mean that you're not able to breastfeed. And so, yeah, I totally get it. And, if I had a member of staff, I'd be having an open conversation about, is this, there's an opportunity here, it does involve travel. How is this going to work with the baby? Do you need to take the baby with you? I know you're breastfeeding. How does that factor in? So, really that person's just a terrible manager, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's for us to break down these barriers now, so women in the future don't have to go through that. We've recently had a discussion with someone in our network that a senior leader in her organisation used to work in France a lot, travel across the country with a newborn baby, and actually she paid for a nanny to go over to France with her every week, paid for that nanny's accommodation to allow her to still continue working whilst breastfeeding, having the childcare. And when asked like how was she able to do that, how is that a possibility, she paid for that outside of her own pocket and didn't really raise it or address it to the company that she worked for. And unfortunately, that's great. I'm so glad that she was able to do that and empowered to do that. But it also is a barrier for other women who might not have the luxury of being able to afford that or that flexibility. And I think us talking about it now and raising awareness will hopefully prevent those barriers in the future and enable women to really work in their schedule that they need and be able to do what they need to do.
Yeah, I think so. So what I'd say on this is that it's amazing. Like, that would be my dream. Like, I'd just love to have a nanny full time, to be honest. And I think, but I think it's an incredibly privileged position to be in, to be able to do that, and financially privileged position to be in. And that's probably only accessible to, you know, maybe the top 2% of female earners or something like this. I think it touches on a wider point around lack of childcare infrastructure. And, you know, one of the things, I was having a conversation with a facilities manager at a big company in the engineering sector, and she was talking about her aspirations to turn part of their car park into a creche for employees at that company. And obviously I was 1000% behind this.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think, you know, that when we look at designing women into the workplace, or designing people into the workplace, considering that the government, you know, don't even recognize that childcare is a thing and that people need it, I think employers that are, you know, wanting to drive gender equality, the really progressive ones, are going to start looking at how do we take care of these responsibilities that people have so they're free and able and, you know, can fully contribute in the workplace. And I think companies that provide creches so that parents, men and women, don't need to worry about childcare concerns as part of their like enhanced packages, I think that's gonna, you know, I will work at whatever that company is, basically. Like, I will take whatever job if that is part of the package. And that's what's going to drive gender equality, right? Women don't need mentor programs and leadership training. Women need childcare so that they can go to work. It's pretty basic.
Yeah, and that actually falls into the other comment we have here, which is about being unable to attend early meetings and early shifts due to childcare not being opening. So it's directly, we're seeing it as a barrier across the board.
Absolutely. And I think this isn't obviously some of these things are exclusive to women. The childcare challenge, you know, disproportionately impacts women because we know that in the UK they're the primary childcare providers, and the government have legislation that essentially forces women to look after children. But I've worked with men who will drop their children off at nursery and will consistently miss morning meetings because they have to do that. And nurseries don't accommodate the time that you drop them off. You know, you can't drop them off a little bit earlier, they're not open. And I remember thinking at the time, why has no one changed the time of this meeting? We don't have to have it at 9 a.m. Like, why not move it to 10 a.m. so that he can be present? And I think the way in which we work doesn't accommodate the fact that people have responsibilities, and we need to factor that in. And I think childcare responsibilities are a pretty consistent set of responsibilities that impact a significant proportion of the working population, that we should start thinking about this more, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's something that does need to be open and discussed. And especially my concern, and something that I've worried about, I don't have kids and I'm still worrying about it, is when they get to school age as well. They finish at 3:30, which doesn't accommodate anyone.
Yeah. So do you know what I always think is really interesting? I'm like, if I was like a member of parliament, or if I was the person setting up the systems that we have that exist in the UK, that I was like, okay, you know, let's look at when we can access childcare for the majority of people. And school is childcare, right? That's someone else looking after and educating your child. Like, and let's look at when people need to go to work. these two things don't line up whatsoever. And so what happens is predominantly women are crippling themselves and burning out, trying to manage this structural impediment to their career, essentially, or life, I would say, is a more accurate way to put it. But it's existed for so long that we just seem to have accepted it as like, it's absolutely fine. But yeah, Fran, you've raised this for me now, right? I've got like 2 years and then I've got to start worrying about this. And I think the answer is you have to pay for wraparound childcare. And, that's then an additional financial burden that you have. And one of the things where if you're not earning a certain amount as a woman, you're more likely going to drop out of the workforce for a few years to deal with that until you're in a position where you can go back to work. And then it's hard to get back into work, and then people don't want to hire you because you've got a gap. And then you have an impact to your working life for the rest of it. It's an absolute disaster. Like, who thought of these systems and who thinks they're still a good idea? Like, not me.
No, I do not either. The financial burden that having a child in childcare has on you is massive.
I pay more for my monthly childcare than I do my mortgage.
Yeah, and that is standard across the board as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how most people afford it, genuinely. Like, I can see why, I have friends that stopped working because they were like, it doesn't take long to do the maths to realize that having childcare does not, like, you're in negative, and you've got to have a really strong desire to go to work to overcome that.
Yeah, you've got to love your job to be a negative. You are paying to go to work.
Yeah.
Your childcare costs more than that. That's literally it. So if you're paying to go somewhere, you need to enjoy it, because then there's no point.
Mm-hmm.
So we have diverged off the topic. I want to ask you, when you came back into the workplace, what did you have in place, and what would you have liked to have in place to make that transition as easy as possible?
So I think that, for me, I'm pretty pragmatic, I think, and I really like working. So my bar's pretty low for what I would have needed for a good transition back into the workplace. And really, all I needed was what I asked for, which was a private, lockable room that I could express breast milk so that I could breastfeed my child. Like, that was literally my only ask. And apparently that was too much. That was too much to ask, because it wasn't possible. And then even when it was raised as okay, this is required now, like, the organization, this is a Times top 50 employer for women, by the way, this organization were absolutely scrambling and struggling to figure out how they could possibly solve this problem that, quote, they'd never seen before. So these are really basic things that women need, like fundamental basic facilities that women need to enable them to just get on with their job, that the engineering sector largely do not have and aren't thinking about, I would say.
We need to talk about the guilt of having a second child so close, or third child so close, and feeling that that's not okay in the workplace, and the barriers that might bring, and the worry that comes along with the fact that you're starting a family and you're growing your family, and yet you feel like that's not okay in the workplace.
I don't know that I can comment on this because I don't plan anything. So
no, I think we'd love to hear from different people in our community about this as well, because we understand it's a barrier, but we've not experienced it.
Yeah. It has to influence thinking, right? When senior leaders are openly saying things like, "Oh, is your career plan to just repeatedly have children and be on maternity leave?" That gets around. Women talk, And so women working in that organization likely are thinking, oh, wow, you know, am I going to be discriminated against for wanting to have a family to a certain plan or something like this? So yeah, I think that's really important to find out about people's experiences, and understand what that looks like. Sounds awful.
These were mine and Marie's experiences. Tell us yours in the comments.